Hi, I'm Clever Ghoul, but you can call me Nikki. Welcome back to the channel. Recently, I sat down to watch one of my favorite animated fairy tale films. Of course, I'm talking about Shrek. There's this one scene in this movie that has always caught my attention, and that's when Shrek and Fiona are walking, and he decides to make her a balloon out of a frog. It's always just lived in my brain as a project that I want to do, and this week, we're gonna make it. Papier-mache paste can be made in a variety of different ways, and you really have to find the one that works best for you. I would say there's pros and cons to each. Now, the method I use is predominantly using Mod Podge and water. This can get expensive because you'll end up using a lot of Mod Podge. I just like it for ease of use, but if it's not for you, it's not for you. So before starting this project, I'd really recommend looking up to see what kind of paste you want to make. If anyone's interested, I can totally make a video on papier-mache paste, but for now, I think it's best to look it up and see which method works best for you. So with all that being said, let's get into it.
For this project, you will need the following: supplies to make your preferred papier-mache paste, brushes to apply papier-mache paste, I use my hands because I'm a goblin, leftover newspaper and brown butcher paper, a punch balloon, chipboard, hot glue, quick seal, white latex-based spray primer, I used Krylon Color Max, a glossy yellow spray for the belly and sides, I used Krylon Decor Selects Gloss Spray in the color Bright Idea, acrylic paint, paint sponges and brushes, polyurethane gloss varnish and a flat brush to apply it, and a string for the balloon. First, blow up the balloon so it's round. You determine the size you want here, but the important thing is that the balloon is spherical. Next, you want to find something that you can attach your balloon to so that it is secure during the papier-mache process. Place the rubber band around that object and tape it down to anchor it. Now's a good time to rip up some newspaper strips and mix up your preferred papier-mache paste. I made mine a touch too watery at first, so I added some salt into the glue and water mixture to prevent mildew. To apply the papier-mache, coat both sides of your paper strip with a thin layer of the paste and then smooth it onto the balloon. Continue this process until the entire surface, minus the balloon knot, is covered. Drying time is important. Sometimes I'll use a hairdryer to speed up the drying time. However, I was worried about the balloon popping or shrinking, so I left this to dry overnight. I repeated the exact same process for the second layer of papier-mache. On day 3, I added the next layer of papier-mache, this time using leftover packaging butcher paper to add more strength to the frog. Again, this was the same process as before, including letting it dry overnight. The next day, I looked over my frog to see what needed to be done. I noticed a lot of bumps and dents, the latter of which I believe came from having too watery of a paste that first day, and knew that I had to deal with that before I could add anything else on. I lightly sanded any extreme edges with a medium grit sandpaper and then moved on to filling the dents. I wanted to do this quickly, so I folded up some butcher paper, hot glued it to stay closed, and then hot glued it to the dent to fill it. I repeated this on all the dents and then covered everything in a layer of papier-mache. I then felt around for any weak spots and added more papier-mache to those areas. I felt that the balloon was safe from popping at this point, so I sped up the drying time with a blow dryer. It was time to start adding in the details. I glued down 4 pieces of newspaper to essentially mark the areas where I was going to put down the legs before pulling out a piece of chipboard and drawing the legs and cutting them out. Both the front and back legs stick out from the frog in a way that still looks inflated. The front legs have a sort of stubby conical base close to the body, while the back legs have more of a tapered conical base that protrudes out further from the body. I made 2 smaller circles on chipboard, cut them out, and then cut into them roughly at the midpoint to make the stubby cone shape. Then I took the front legs, placed them deeply into the cut that I had just made, added some hot glue, rolled the circle around to make a cone, and then hot glued those edges together to finish off the front leg base. For the back legs, I made 1 large circle, cut it in half, and then rolled and bent the chipboard so that it was easy to wrap around the longer back leg. I glued it to the top edge of the back leg, wrapped it around the leg, and glued it to the bottom, resulting in a thin cone shape. I added butcher paper strips to the legs so that they already had a partial base going for when I added paste and more papier-mache on later. Then I attached the legs to the body with hot glue, and once secure, started adding papier-mache to the leg bases. Once dry, I did a little bit more sanding, patching, and papier-macheing. Next, it was time to add in the facial details. I cut out some chipboard to make the mouth of the frog, folded a little flap at the base, and hot glued it down onto the frog. For the eyes, I had some flat back pearls that were the perfect size, so I hot glued those down. Then I cut out some more chipboard to make eyelids and hot glued them into place. I added some more papier-mache to those areas and dried it with the hairdryer. I also sanded the eyes lightly here so that any paint would adhere to them later on. I noticed some holes and areas that needed to be filled, so I pulled out some quick seal and smoothed it into those areas. I left that to dry for a few hours per the label instructions. Finally, it's time to paint. I started by covering the entire frog in a white Krylon spray primer. I did multiple coats, letting it dry for about 20 minutes between layers. Once the frog had a fully white base, I wanted to add in the yellow belly and sides, so I sprayed those areas with Krylon Decor Selects Glossy Spray in the color Bright Idea. It was at this point that I'd made a little bit of a mistake mistake. I had forgotten to pop the balloon. I should have popped the balloon before I took it out to spray. So I brought the frog back in, popped the balloon, and then did a quick patch job before bringing it back outside to coat with that same yellow spray paint. In the meantime, I looked up images of the frog and drew out the dot placement on a piece of paper. Now that the spray paint was dry, I penciled in the dots on the frog, and then using a burgundy craft paint, added in the centered color of the dots. I think I should have used an orangey brown color here to be truer to the movie, but I didn't realize that at the time, and I'm okay with the result. While that dried, I added in a layer of white acrylic paint onto the eyeballs, and then I hot glued the mouth shut. I added a second coat of that burgundy paint onto the spots, and then dried it with a hairdryer before moving onto the green base layer. For the base, I used a lime green acrylic paint. I started by carefully framing the dots I had just made, and then with a bigger brush, filled in the rest of the area that needed to be green. Once dry, I mixed together an olive green and then brushed that on top of the lime green base. I concentrated the olive at the top of the frog, and as I got towards the areas where the green and yellow met, I would wipe the excess olive paint off of my brush and go back and forth with whatever was left, blurring out that line and creating more of a soft blend between the colors. To add some texture into the skin, I pulled out a dry sponge and applied some light yellow paint across the dried green paint. To further add some depth, I repeated the process but used a honey brown paint. Now I wanted to add in some of the darker lines and marks on the frog, so I pulled out a deep warm gray paint. I started by adding in the lines around the dots, making sure to vary the line weight throughout. Lastly, with that same gray paint, I took the end of my paintbrush, dipped it into the paint, and then applied it to the center of the eyes, creating the frog's pupils. Once everything had been dry for a few hours, it was time to seal everything with a clear gloss varnish. I applied a thin coat with a large flat synthetic brush and then left it to sit overnight to dry, which means it's time for the reveal.
So here we are. Here is the final product. I am so happy with how it turned out. As I said, the spots could have been more of an orangey, terracotta-y color, but I kind of like the brighter red. They do look more red on camera than they do in real life. I think it's a fun contrast between the lime green. I think it turned out really good. I think it looks a little bit like a pufferfish, which now I kind of want to make a papier-mâché pufferfish. I love it so much. It's ridiculous. The face kills me, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. Now, the only thing missing is I would take some hot glue and tie a string around this and have it hang down to make it look like a balloon. But since I might actually end up hanging this up from the ceiling, I'm thinking I might leave it for now. Now, if you want to hang this from the ceiling as well, I would recommend adding some fishing line around all 4 limbs and having them meet up in the middle, tie a little knot and pin it to the ceiling. Now, this is a more time-consuming process because of the drying time. So if you're going to make this at home and you have to have it for a specific deadline, like if you're making it for a party, I would recommend blocking out maybe a couple hours a day for about a week to make this. You could probably do it faster, but that's about how long it took me, so that's my recommendation. Anyway, 14-year-old me is definitely so pleased with this project and so happy that I finally made it. Now, there's also a snake balloon in the movie, and I have been considering making it. So if you want a tutorial on that and want me to teach you how to make the snake animal balloon, I can definitely do that. So let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!